Good morning. We're about to get started, so if everyone could take their seats, we can get going. Before I start, could everyone, well, actually there's a lot of seats available, and there's no one standing at the back, but if we get more people, I'm going to ask you to raise your hands so that people can find a seat, but we'll skip that for now. So welcome to day 2 of code4lib. I'm going to start off with announcing our duty officers for the morning. Our duty officers are Julie Swerchek and Whitney Watkins. There's Julie right there. There's also, can be found on the website at 2016.code4lib.org/duty-officers if you need to see what they look like to find them. Secondly, I really want to thank our silver level sponsors this morning. We had a few of those. They are Temple University Libraries, Princeton University Library, Khalifa, Oregon State University Libraries and Press, Kuali Ole, and the University of Maryland College of Information Studies. So can I get a round of applause for our silver sponsors? Okay, and next I want to thank our childcare sponsors, which that service was sponsored by Equinox and by Curate Camp. So thank you very much for that service. It would not have been possible without you, and it helped out quite a few. We had I think six attendees use it, and it was incredibly useful, and they wouldn't be here without you. So thanks for that. Appreciate it. Okay, here you want to come up. So the next thing I want to say is that we have had a bid for 2017 code4lib, a bid from Chattanooga, and that's super exciting. But one of the things is they are still looking for partners to work with them. Particularly, they're looking for a fiscal agent, a fiscal host, which is an absolutely essential role. Let me tell you, from my point of view as a 2016 organizer, you can't go forward without it. You can't sign contracts. You can't move forward. So if your organization is local, somewhat local to Chattanooga, or if you're just interested in being part of 2017 code4lib and you can commit to something like that, you should come find Mary, and she will and have that conversation. So if we want to do this again next year, somebody step up. So all right.
Yes,
thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. We have some space left over. So we have some space for post-conference events Thursday afternoon. Right now we have 2 rooms. We're trying to negotiate with the hotel to get 1 or 2 more spaces. But we've had one expression of interest for a post-conference Birds of a Feather session, and that's from the Fedora 4 community. So they will be meeting probably, 12:30, 1 o'clock on Thursday afternoon in one of the hotel spaces. We're going to sort out exactly where. But if you're interested in having a post-conference session, a Birds of a Feather group, come find one of the organizers and we can sort out a room for you. We do have some limited space, but if you're interested, come talk to us and we can try and find space for you. So that is, and the Fedora 4 group is, it's Josh Westgard and Andrew Wood. So if you're interested in the Fedora 4 Birds of a Feather, come find them and just talk to them, let them know you're interested. Okay, so we have another social event tonight, which is what we're calling the Play and Share. It is going to be in the hotel, in the same room where the Hamilton room, which is where most of the lunch buffets were set up, the big room. And the idea of the event tonight is that it's just a social place for attendees to congregate. There will be space for playing board games. There will be people bringing instruments and playing music. And it's also a place to share things that you want to bring. I know a lot of attendees like to bring local beers and craft sodas and those kinds of things. You can bring those tonight and share those. There will also be a lot of baked goods, like a lot of cannoli from a great South Philly bakery that I highly recommend. So and so if you have anything else you want to bring and share and play and hang out, that will be happening tonight from 6 to 9:30. So yeah, that's tonight. And so now would like to announce the names of our scholarship winners. We got 9 scholarship winners who attended this year, and so I'd just like to honor them all because this is an absolutely essential part of the work we do in this community of making it inclusive and more diverse, and it's one step that we take, and so I'm really glad that we were able to bring 9 people in and have them make it, even if it would have been difficult for them to be here. So to the scholarship winners, we have Allison Blaine, Adrian Lai, Eleanor Nygaard, Ariadne Rebien, Maria Soaf, Helen Marie Sheridan, Tara Strongowski, Patricia Villanueva, and Lucy Wang. So those are our 9 scholarship winners. So can we get a round of applause for them? And a big thank you to the scholarship committee who worked very hard to make that possible. So, and just a few other announcements about, we will have mic runners for questions today. So if you have a question, you can, after a session, you can just raise your hand and a mic runner will come find you and bring you the microphone rather than making you sneak out through all the chairs. And I think that's all I have for this morning. So let's get started with the program. So our first speakers this morning are going to be Damian Katz and Matthew Short with their talk, Linked Open Dime Novels, or 19th Century Fiction and 21st Century Data.
Hi, so my name's Matt Short. I'm the metadata librarian at Northern Illinois University, and joining me is Damian Katz, who a lot of you probably know through his work on Viewfind. But today we're going to talk about Linked Open Novels, which is a project to publish a bibliography of 19th century popular fiction as linked data, some of which is currently being used within NIU's digital dime novel collection. Before Damian gets into the details of the actual implementation, I'm going to provide some background about dime novels themselves, including cataloging and bibliography, and then introduce the model that we're currently using. Dime novels were the best sellers of the mid to late 19th century. Costing between 5 and 10 cents each, they were especially popular among working class people and children who often couldn't afford conventional hardback fiction. While primarily meant to entertain, dime novels also dealt with issues of race, gender, and class, providing unique insights into what a diverse group of Americans were thinking and feeling towards the end of the century. Most early American genre fiction also began in the dime novel, including the Western, detective stories, and even some early science fiction. Today, they're especially of interest to social and cultural historians and people studying the history of the book and the evolution of popular fiction. Dime novel publishers were primarily out for profit, which often led to fairly convoluted publication histories. Because it was much cheaper to ship periodicals through the mail, they would often disguise their novels by issuing them in a series, and sometimes including filler or backup content. Sometimes the backup content might be a short story, but it could also be a novel that had been serialized over the span of several issues. Publishers would also frequently reprint stories, whether or not they owned the copyright, which was obviously much cheaper than having to pay an author to write a new novel. There might be several editions of any given story in different formats and different series appearing over the span of decades. Sometimes these would be published complete in one volume, but they might also be serialized as a backup feature in a different series. Title, author, and even the text itself would sometimes change from simply removing a subtitle to removing an entire chapter or an entire section of a book. The publisher also wanted to control the author, which is one of the reasons why so many dime novels are attributed to pseudonyms. These house names would be shared by several people, but the name itself would be owned by the publisher, who would then try to protect it as if it were a trademark. The publisher would also vary attributions between editions of a story, either to disguise acts of plagiarism or to trick readers into buying repackaged stories. For almost a century, dime novels were only cataloged at the series level, if they were even cataloged at all. Most users, however, want more than just an inventory of the issues that a library owns. They want to know what those issues contain, how the contents are related, and who wrote them. Today, we catalog dime novels as monographic series, but many of the relationships that people are most interested in are still missing from our bibliographic records. Partly this is due to limitations of the MARC format, but mostly it has to do with a lack of time, since unpacking and tracing all of these relationships can be complicated. Scholars and collectors like Albert Johansen and Edward T. LeBlanc stepped into the gap left by catalogers by compiling comprehensive dime novel bibliographies. These were written over decades and consist of hundreds or thousands of pages with detailed relationships between stories, editions, authors, and series. Both of the two major dime novel bibliographies are currently available online, but they're in very different formats, which makes it difficult to combine the data or reuse that data in different contexts. In the late 90s, NIU converted the Johansen bibliography to HTML, focusing only on presentation, while more recently Villanova has been working on dimenovels.org, a project to build a relational database using the data from LeBlanc's unpublished bibliographic listings as a foundation. In addition to those at NIU and Villanova, there are substantial dime novel collections at the University of South Florida, Stanford University, and Bowling Green. Combined, these consist of thousands of novels with hundreds of thousands of pages. But because there are so many different manifestations of any given story, it's unlikely that any collection is complete or ever will be complete. This means that a researcher must first know that multiple editions of a story exist, then they need to go out to the various digital collections to search for available copies. Among other things, this really discourages close reading of the dime novel because it makes it so difficult to place any particular story within its larger bibliographic context. So obviously, all of these digital collections would benefit from sharing data with each other, both about the relationships between dime novels as well as their dime novel holdings. So in a lightning talk at code4lib 2013, Damien introduced the work he'd been doing on dimenovels.org, mentioning that there might be a linked data application, or some way to publish the relational database as RDF. At the same time, I'd been working on ways to model the Johansen bibliography with vague plans to use the data within a digital dime novel collection I had just started working on. And that's me in the audience listening to Damien at code4lib 2013. Not long after we started to work out what publishing the bibliography as linked data would actually mean, which has been a conversation that's been ongoing over the better part of 2 years, mostly during our lunch breaks and commutes. We started by writing an ontology, which has since gone through multiple iterations, especially during the early implementation stages. The current version consists of 4 local classes, including creative works, edition, series, and copy, all of which are intended to align better with the pre-existing dimenovels.org data model. Most of the properties, however, are from RDA unconstrained, which is basically RDA without direct links to Ferber entities. So instead of WEMI and agent, we use local classes in the domains and ranges of all of our properties. Or all of our classes. Importing RDA involved converting relevant properties to OWL XML and then declaring English equivalents for all of the opaque URIs, which was intended to make writing code and queries somewhat easier. The model also includes partial imports of FOSS, GOS, and Dublin Core, which are primarily used to relate people to their identities. In the case of editions, we wanted to be able to query for every edition of the same story, whether that story appeared as a lead story or as a backup story. We can't do this right now in our digital collections because this data doesn't exist, or it might exist, but it's only in the form of uncontrolled textual notes. So in the model, each creative work can be assigned to one or more editions through the property has realization, which allows us to note variations in things like title, attribution, imprint, and so on. An edition can also be used as a container for other editions through the property container of. This makes it possible to trace changes to the contents of an issue as it's reprinted, which would sometimes happen if a publisher was sued for copyright infringement or otherwise required to remove a story from their back catalog. Creative works can also serve as containers for other creative works, which is especially useful in the case of serialized backup stories, allowing us to treat each part as a constituent work. Finally, the model allows us to make a distinction between the name as it appears on the resource and the person who is actually behind that name. Each edition is assigned a name through the property has credit, while each creative work is assigned a person through the property author. The name is then related to the person via focus, treating the person as a thing and the name as a concept. Let's bring together all of the creative works by person or all of the editions by name, which is helpful when a particular creative work is attributed to multiple names or the same name is shared by multiple people. Now I can turn things over to Damien to talk about how we implemented the model in the context of dimenovels.org.
Thank you. So before I start talking about our implementation, just a couple things about how I'm going to present this. First of all, I know that you all probably aren't dying to build your own dime novel databases, so this isn't really about what we did specifically. Part of the point here is that there's a lot of talk about linked data at a really high level, and we wanted to show that with limited time and resources, you can actually do practical things with these technologies that get you real benefits, and hopefully this has application in all sorts of domains. Also, I'm going to throw around some linked data talk because I assume that most of you have seen lots of high-level talks about linked data and have heard it before. If you haven't, feel free to stop me after the talk and I'll try to explain it as best I can. And I'll also say that I understood it a lot better after actually getting my hands in it, so this sort of project is a great learning experience. So with that said, what existing infrastructure did we have for the dimenovels.org database? It's built on GBDB, which is my pet project that I've been working on for far too long, which currently is in the form of a PHP, MySQL, Zen Framework 2 application. And fortunately, this is actually built in such a way that's very friendly for RDF. It has pretty URLs representing things, and it has a relational database that relates these things together. And probably if you have any sort of project lying around that is a database that describes things and the way they're related to one another, it looks something like this. And this is a good first step toward exporting your data as RDF. So how do I get RDF incorporated into the software? First of all, I need a way for my website that's presenting the dime novel information to feed it to the reader as linked data. Certainly one approach I could have taken would have been to use RDFA to embed semantics into the existing presentation, but that doesn't really appeal to me. First of all, because I like to sort of keep my data and my presentation separate from one another, also because there are tricky problems in the linked data space of differentiating between an object in the real world and the data representation of it. And if you have one URL that is both the presentation and the data, it gets harder to make statements about these different things. So what I ended up doing was using the content negotiation strategy where my existing URLs use HTTP content negotiation to find out whether the client wants an HTML view or RDF data, and then redirects them to another URL accordingly. So this gives us separate URLs for different representations, but also has a single conceptual URL for the real-world object. And if you don't know anything about HTTP content negotiation, let me step back a second and say, as web developers, it's really easy to do good web development and not know a lot about the underlying technologies of the web. I strongly encourage you, read up on HTTP, learn some of the low-level fundamentals. This will help you tremendously in the ongoing evolution of web technologies with things like RESTful design and linked data. And I say this from experience because I got away with not knowing a lot for a long time. So anyway, preaching off. So anyway, once I had my content negotiation in place, then presenting RDF through the interface basically just became a matter of implementing another view in my model view controller architecture. So take the same data that you're using to render things for the user, instead render RDF. I used the Easy RDF library to do this, but whatever language you're using probably has a decent RDF library that you could use. And then, of course, I had to make a few adjustments to my underlying data structure to reflect the fact that now some of my local concepts have equivalent concepts out in the broader world. So you need to have a way to be able to say, you know, this person corresponds with this URI at the Library of Congress, and so on. But ultimately, it wasn't a whole lot of work. Content negotiation, alternate views, a little bit of extra data. So once this is done, what benefits do we reap? Well, of course, from my perspective at dimenovels.org, I want to steal his data. And so NIU, of course, has cataloged lots of dime novels. I don't have all of those dime novels in my database. And you know, they're using mods. This is not a linked data technology, but mods and Mark both have the sort of hacked on but useful feature that you can associate URIs with elements of the metadata. And so even with just that one little tiny hint of linked data in there, it made it much easier for me to write an ingest tool that would parse the mods, match up identifiers, and automatically add things to the database. The shared global identifiers provided by the URIs giving me much greater confidence that the things I'm generating are accurate, as opposed to having to do string matching and guessing and scoring and hoping. So this process got hundreds of new records into my database. It also proved that redundancy is not a bad thing, because my database already contained many entries for items that NIU had cataloged, and there were errors on both sides that neither of us would ever have noticed if we hadn't tried to reconcile these two sets. So don't feel too bad if you duplicate work that someone else is doing. So once I've got my database populated and I've stolen all of the data from NIU, I want to give something back. And as Matt said, what NIU wanted was the ability to express some relationships that just aren't there in the mods, but that which can be easily queried with the proper RDF data set. So I now have my website, which can present all of this lovely RDF data. We need to be able to query it. And so NIU came up with the query, but we had to provide the technology to run the query. So our first attempt was to host a Sparkle endpoint at dimenovels.org. First challenge is getting the RDF from all of the individual pages of dimenovels.org into a triple store so that it could be queried. This proved to be more difficult than I would have hoped with existing crawling tools, because they really seem to want to just suck up the entire web, and I only wanted to harvest data that lived at dimenovels.org. So after feeling that there should be a tool that could do this for me, but not being able to find it, I gave up and wrote one. I named it after the villain of the dime novel, The Spider and the Fly. It's called Merpoint. You can find it on GitHub. So I used Merpoint to suck up the data. I put it into a Fuseki instance. Matt implemented his end to do the queries. It worked really nicely, but now we have the problem that if my Sparkle endpoint goes offline for any reason, NIU's website dies, and we can't have that. So that brought us around to attempt number 2, the same thing, only not at dimenovels.org. But a challenge to this is that Matt has somewhat limited resources in terms of not being directly able to install complicated applications on servers. And so he found the nice compromise solution of Arc2, which is a PHP MySQL-based RDF library and triple store. It has the disadvantage of not being currently maintained, but it works, and that counts for a lot. So he installed that. He got a copy of my Merpoint RTF dump. He loaded it in there, and it just worked. Because one of the beauties of RDF is that the basic fundamental model of linked data is really simple and thus highly portable. And so to a much greater extent than with something like SQL, you can just take the data and move it around and change tools, and it continues to work. And this was a really nice example of that. And so he just changed his endpoint URL, it kept going. And that is actually all we have. There's a few minutes left for questions. There are also lots of links here if you want to look at our code, look at some dime novels. And there you go.
If I wanted, right now, I need an example of some linked data related to a resource. Which one of these URLs could I go to get it, and how would I formulate my query?
So if you want to look at an example, go to dimenovels.org and do a search to look up a person or a title or a series. And in the URL that you end up on, change the word show to RDF in all caps, and you'll see a turtle dump of the RDF representation of that resource. And right now, this is a work in progress, so the RDF dump is just enough data to meet Matt's needs. It's not a complete representation, but of course we're hoping to work toward that so that eventually the whole data set can just be dumped and shared, and it's not tied to the other underlying infrastructure.
Thank you.
All right, well, it seems that's it, so I will donate our 1 minute and
Could I ask-
23 seconds.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, one more, I'm sorry.
So it was a great presentation. When I see a chart that has works and additions on it, I start looking for manifestations and imprints. There's some very well-considered book history, publishing history, data models for describing stuff like that. But I noticed that you guys used a slightly specialized, maybe, way of understanding that stuff. So could you talk about the ontology you developed in terms of how you were reconsidering existing work and describing the publishing history of fictional works?
Well, there's sort of a long history behind our data model because it's somewhat tied to the system I've been using for bibliographic databases for almost 20 years now, I shudder to say. And so the model I've sort of settled on is more of a two-level model where you have the abstract idea of the work and the concrete manifestations. And there are certainly other models that add more layers of granularity than that. The problem that I've found in conceptualizing those is figuring out exactly where the lines are drawn between, say, a work and an expression. So we sort of settled on the really clear-cut, this is conceptual, this is tangible, with the possibility that we might consider additional layers of conceptual granularity in the future. But right now it was sort of a pragmatic decision to keep using the existing model that works for us while mapping it into a somewhat more shareable space. But I'm certainly interested in discussing this if anyone cares to later on in the day. All right, thank you, everyone.
Okay, next up we have Maria Sawaf with Beyond the Keyword, Creative Search and Query Expansions based on DBPedia. Let's see, which one is that one's yours? There you go.
How do I get this on the screen? Yeah. Did I just play the slideshow?
Yeah, let's see.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
All right.
So that works? Okay, perfect. Okay. So hi, my name is Maria, and today I'll be presenting to you a tool I've been working on called BrainForks, which allows you to search creatively and go beyond the keyword. So what's it all about? I'm sure many of you have heard of semantic search. I'm going to talk about that briefly, and I'm going to show you how I take that one step further to do creative search, or better known to librarians as serendipitous search. I'm going to talk about two case studies. I'm going to talk about the code I've written to implement these ideas, and I'm going to touch upon a bit of user experience and UI for your creative applications. So what is semantic search? It essentially takes a seed query and maps it out to a bunch of related words in order to, so the search is performed on those related words as well, and you retrieve a larger set of relevant results. So taking the example of school, usually people who implement this will at least start with synonyms. So you'll have school mapped out to academic institution, educational organizations, and then even beyond that, semantic keywords. So school mapped out to school teachers, school districts, school bus, students, exams. So those are semantically related keywords. And where do these come from? You can use a lot of controlled vocabularies. People do that. The Library of Congress subject headings work as well, and I know a lot of you have access to those. I use DBPedia, but just a note that you can use something else. So if we look at DBPedia, you'll see this is the page for schools, and at the bottom you have the SCOS broader. So this is queried, again, using Sparkle on a triple store. So SCOS is really used to represent hierarchy in the way that you're used to for your just hierarchical terms for categories and subcategories. So you see the synonyms there. Also on the same page for schools, if you scroll down, you have broader of, and then you'll see a bunch of other words, school bus, and just kind of take note of how many words there are there, because that's going to be relevant later. And then if you look at the wiki page redirects, it's kind of like how maybe misspelt words like school, S-K-O-O-L, or in other languages. And I don't know if, there were quite a few people in the semantic search workshop on Monday, and the prime example used there was kind of how do we map out dog catcher to animal control officer. And someone in the audience said, well, okay, well, where do I get a data set for that? So just kind of linking that together. In the wiki page redirect for animal control officer, you do have dog catcher. So that's for semantic search. So what is creative search? That's kind of taking it one step further. So synonyms, then you have semantic search, and then on the external level, you have creative search. So the limits with semantic search is it kind of still restricts you to the same knowledge space as your original query, and creative search is kind of meant to go beyond that and allow ideas to be shared across disciplines. So if we took the page for photography, I kind of screenshotted the DBPedia entries. It is linked to imaging, which is linked to image processing, which is linked to computer vision. And I don't know if many of you know about computer vision, but there are a lot of ideas that can be shared with photography and that are indeed shared in a lot of photography and image processing software. But I guess so the prime issue when you're going to do it the way I'm doing, which is basically relating words that are related to the words that are related to the keywords, you're just kind of going a little far. You're dealing with an exponential data set, and your number one problem is going to be filtering. And so the way I do it, and I'm going to talk about Google Ngrams later, I use word frequencies to basically take out words and expressions that are commonly used in the English language and to filter out those that are not so used and not so common. I'm going to talk about fault tolerance as well. There's a few quirks in the DBPedia data set that I had to deal with in my code, and automation. I'll talk about how I automated the process of getting related keywords. Oh, that's ugly. Okay. So even if you think this whole creative thing's a little crazy and on the fringe, you can take the same code and just tweak it for different applications. So I'm going to show creative book search and creative project search in my case studies, but for like cross-disciplinary academic search, you had the example of like photography and computer vision. For children, I'm also going to show that later. For non-native speakers, my mom's a non-native English speaker, and I kind of looked through her Google history searches, and I looked at, for example, she looked how to solve a child computer game addiction. I think one of her friends' sons was addicted to video games. But what she really meant, I think, was teenager and adolescent, but there really isn't a term for that in her native language. And everyone's just a child until they get married and have their own children anyway. So it would have mapped it out to there. And computer game, though, is okay, the real term, and most of the articles that are relevant use the term video game, and DBPedia kind of redirects computer game to video game in a neat way like that. So yeah, non-native speakers. And then for everyone, kind of lazy search, words you don't know. I know when I started searching this topic like 3 years ago, I had no idea librarians had this thing called serendipity, and like serendipitous search. And I kind of ran it. There's an API for this, Brainforks 8080/creative search creativity. And you kind of get serendipity at the bottom there, along with other relevant stuff that I honestly should have searched, but didn't think to originally when I was looking at the topic. So moving on to a case study. So I'm going to talk about creative book search. So the idea is kind of just like a regular book search like you would on Amazon Books or your own catalog, and but bringing out books related to what you're looking for, but also allowing that kind of cross-disciplinary learning I was talking about. So if you run it for fashion design, if we take that as an example, so if you use my API, I would not recommend you all do this right now. It's single-threaded and it will break, but you can do it later. So I show you distance 1, distance 2, distance 3, and you can see how the data set grows larger and larger and larger as you go further from the original query. Although you can't see most of the words here, a lot of them are pretty cool in that they are like you can learn from them, and some are irrelevant, which I will talk about. So this is kind of how I imagine it would look like if you put it into a real application. Here I'm just pulling out Overdrive books for the keyword that comes out in my list. So you have fashion design, then perfumery, and then for body art and photography. And then, yeah. So among the few irrelevant searches, you have surgery, and it came from sewing and stitches. And yeah, that's one place you do not want ideas mixing. But I guess it can. Maybe it did once. I don't know. Yeah, and for the UI, I do recommend for some examples, for some of the creative, I guess, words that come out, to use breadcrumbs to kind of follow the trail of the idea. And it's like following, kind of going back photography, image processing, computer vision. So just have breadcrumbs to explain where is this coming from. Or to have at least a heading on the top. For fashion, you had luxury brands and luxury vehicles come up, kind of like an idea exchange between those two fields. And the other one, which I won't talk about, but I did use this at the local library for like kind of a maker project search. And I like to use the example of the camelback because, for real, the camelback inventor was a paramedic who was really interested in cycling, and so when it came to fix his water portability problems, he thought, oh, why don't I use this like IV-looking thing? And indeed, if you follow DBPedia from dehydration to fluid replacement to IV, you would have gotten kind of that idea. And the kids kind of had a lot of fun with it and did come up with some kooky ideas. But I guess what I really want to take that example for more relevant to you, I guess, is the UX UI part of it. In the creative book search, all of the kind of relationships and all the related word mapping happened in the background. So it was a query expansion, because the query expansions happen in an automated way. But for this, I had it kind of related keywords in the sidebar. And the first problem I encountered was, again, too many keywords and needing to filter that. And you kind of get that, like if you take a book search in the WorldCat and you look at related subjects, it's like a ton. And then you get library thing. I think Amazon kind of hits a sweet spot with like 8 or 10. And I think my recommendation, I guess, is if you're going to use that for kind of creative or exploratory search, is to really use word frequencies to put out more common terms and just keep them as few as possible. And this is another example taken from the Code4lib journal, where a researcher from the University of Pennsylvania wanted to implement kind of a similar idea of related keywords, but it's just like there's just so many. Like if someone was to click on something related to their original keyword in order to go somewhere else, it's just, it's a lot. And so just kind of think about frequencies, word frequency filtering while doing this. Okay, so implementation. So I guess, like I said, it's exponential data. I used Google Ngrams, and so Google released kind of a giant list of Ngrams, which you can find online. They're unprocessed, so I have a script on GitHub so that you can process them. I also have an API that you can hit in order to get the frequency of a list of words that you send. But essentially, they scraped all their Google books from the year 1500 to the late 2000s, and came up with a list of frequencies for 1 word, 2 words together, 3 words together. So so n-grams. In my case, like you can't, for example, when implementing the code, you can't meaningfully compare 1 grams and 2 grams meaningfully because you're going to have way more 2 grams, but each one's going to be less frequent. So I ended up having to divide, so I took the ratio of numbers and I ended up having to divide the 1 grams by 11.75. So if it doesn't really make sense, kind of just think about it. But yeah. So you have to do something like that, some manipulation. More frequent words, like you see at the top, analysis, attention, literature, planning. Those are, I found they're words that are used in many different contexts and so don't have much meaning. So I kind of filtered out the top frequent, the most frequent words because they just didn't have much meaning because they're so vague. And then in that data set, you have like newer words that are less represented, like email, because the data starts in the year 1500, you'd think email just is way less frequent because it's just kind of something that came out more recently, as well as scientific terms. So, you know, anything under like information retrieval, like a computer science concept, is going to be less frequent than something like sky and sun, just because the English language overall uses less scientific terms. And then for automation, it's in Python. I have a RESTful API, and under the applications page, I kind of showed you how you can hit that. So it's like Brainforks 8080/creative book or /creative search, or /get frequency, or get freak is what I called it. And for fault tolerance, I have a lot of natural language problem issues, you know, the common ones, like combining singular and plural forms of the words. I had to deal with lemmas, so like fishing and fishermen and fish, you know, kind of had to treat it all as one word. And some other DBPedia quirks that I had to handle. That's all kind of in the code. If you have questions about it, I'm happy to answer. Yeah, and so in conclusion, many applications, you just kind of have to tweak the frequency that your thresholds are and like how many top frequent words are you going to use. But you can have it for many different applications. And you have some user experience decisions to make. So are you going to do query expansions, kind of like automated relationships happening behind the scenes, or are you going to have it in the navigation on the side, kind of related keywords? And how many of those words are you going to display? And yeah, so I have some resources on how you can implement this with Solr as a query expansion, or if you're going to use the side panel kind of related terms, how you can use that in Solr as well. And I kind of list out the few technologies and libraries that I used as well. And the code's on GitHub, or should be tonight.
Thank you, Maria. Our next talk is So You Think You Want to Migrate to RDF? Stephen Anderson and Evan English. Let's see, where's yours? Oh. Okay, I get it. There we go.
How do we get it up on the? Okay, we're good.
Yeah, we're good.
So, hello, I'm Stephen Anderson from the Boston Public Library.
And I'm Evan English from the Boston Public Library, and this is So You Think You Want to Migrate to RDF. One thing straight, people, we're only up here to talk about two things, kittens and RDF. And unfortunately, due to time constraints, we had to cut out most of the kitten slides. So let's just get to the RDF. So if you are thinking of migrating your data into RDF, or if you're thinking about providing a serialization of your data in RDF, or if you just consider yourself RDF curious, this talk is going to deal with some of the decision points, pain points, the ways in which you will be tested as you try and get yourself onto this map here. So RDF aka triples, aka the graph, the data model specifying statements about resources in the form of subject, predicate, object expressions. So a lot of the talks that we saw yesterday kind of focused on the last part of these triples, the objects. We're going to talk a little bit more about predicates, predicates being the vocabularies and terms that you use to describe your objects. And so as you migrate your data into RDF, you have to make a lot of decisions about what predicates, what terms, what vocabularies you're going to use to represent your data. So as always, you want to choose wisely. So as you migrate, you have to decide which vocabulary am I going to use, which schema, what terms do I want to use to describe my data. And so there are obviously a lot of different vocabularies representing a lot of different knowledge domains, representations. So how do you decide which one to use as you migrate your data? Really the key thing to keep in mind is that reuse is how linked data, is how vocabularies gain value. So the more times that people use a URI, the more value that URI has, the greater its meaning becomes. And so you should always prefer using an existing schema or vocabulary URI instead of inventing a new one, which is something that I think has gotten lost from time to time. So finding vocabularies, a couple of great tools that you can use. Linked open vocabularies is a really fantastic tool. It's basically like a search engine for vocabularies and terms. But it also gives you some information about the frequency with which those vocabularies and terms are used. So it's a really great resource. Same as is also another nice tool that you can use. You can put in a URI and it will show you other URIs that people have indicated that mean the same thing. So you can kind of move between vocabularies using that. Usually when we talk about migrating data in the past, we talked about maybe moving from MARC to mods or from mods to Dublin Core or from this schema to that schema. And it's always just sort of this one-to-one change. But with RDF, you're not limited to a single vocabulary. You can mix and match. And so your possibilities become greater. And you have a lot more ability to describe things. We've all seen cases of schemas sort of people jamming data or into places that it doesn't really belong in mods or MARC or other things like that. So this is just a quick example of using Dublin Core elements and schema.org terms to describe a single resource. With great power becomes great responsibility, obviously. So the thing is, you find a predicate that you want to use. Can I just do that? Can I just use it? Well, there are some rules that people sometimes are not aware of, and so specifically, we're going to talk about domain and range, and also the idea that just because it's URI doesn't mean you can use it as a predicate.
So the range of an object is basically going to be the value of the predicate itself, what you actually resolve the value to, or the predicate to. And in ranges, if you had a mods extent before, you might have a string literal of one photographic print that you want to now move to RDF. And looking through that previous search engine of linked data vocabularies, you may find DC terms extent, and you probably have heard of that. Everybody knows DC terms, so that might look like a good thing that you might want to use for that data point. But if you look at the expected values for that predicate, resolving it or going to the official publishing documents for that linked data source, you notice that it actually does not accept the string literal. It accepts a type of size or duration. So you couldn't just use a string literal with that. You'd have to have a blank note or another element that it resolves to first. But at the same time, other institutions like DPL and Europeana are actually using that with a string literal and not actually following that range definition for that particular element itself. So is that actually a problem? Are ranges important? Because we never actually do this in a database or an XML document. If you had a foreign key field, you wouldn't just stick the text string Bob into it. It would complain about that. So, but right now validation is kind of lacking in RDF, and there is no semantic web police that says if you're using predicates, are you actually using them the way they've been defined? So as a group, and when you're doing modeling, you kind of have to come to a choice then. You can conform to an accepted usage, the one that the rest of the community that you're in is currently using and dealing that predicate with. Or you might use a less popular predicate, possibly even minting your own, but then you would have fewer harvesters that are trying to use that data, understand actually what that predicate is out of the box. They'd have to code something specific for it, but when they resolve that predicate, they would actually be able to know what ranges to expect and not have to be guessing as to whether or not you're following the definitions or not. So if you were to do the other choice, which is a kind of a 50-50 split for most of the time when I talk to people as to whether or not ranges matter or not, in these cases where you have reasons to break them of your own institutional need, you could look at something like bibframe extent, which does have a range of a literal. But again, it has less adoption than DC terms extent, and it also has this used with property, if you look closely enough, called instance. And that is what we're going to segue now into the domain, which is basically going to be the object that your predicate is associated with, the one that it is being applied to. The latest thinking about this from those that I've spoken with is that domains actually mean very little. Despite the fact that bibframe extent has a domain of bibframe instance, it's okay as long as the fact that your object could also be that bibframe instance, even though it may not specifically say that it is a bibframe instance. The only caveat to this is just to be wary that if there is something that being a bibframe instance does that invalidates your actual model, like if it says that the pref label refers to a book and you're trying to describe a music object, then you couldn't do it then. But as far as I'm aware, there's nothing that prevents you from using bibframe like that so far. Another topic when it comes to linked data is extinction. Basically, most of your URIs contain data that is just more than the URL. You're getting a lot of additional data from that actual URI source. And obviously, URIs have the library community behind them, so they'll never go away. Yeah. So in this example here, in the official DC terms documentation right now, they recommended for DC terms format, one of the main systems you should use is this MIME one for file types, JPEG and so on. But if you try to resolve any of those, you might notice that you come to a not found page. And that's been that way since October 2015. There's a GitHub issue about it, but it still hasn't been resolved. And there are people using these URIs in production right now. So there has been lots of talk about how to potentially handle this use case, but as far as I know, nobody's actually done any actual work on it because most of their URI is resolved now, so it's kind of always been lower priority. And I think that the best thing that I've heard of that you can do is just simply if there is data that you care about from that URI, you still have to store that text locally and make sure that you have that long-term preserved at this current time.
Okay, so are we having fun yet? I want to talk a little bit about some modeling issues that you're probably going to run into as you move to RDF that might be potentially headache-inducing. So what if no predicate exists for your term? What if you have some really specialized type of data and you just can't find any possible predicate that makes sense? Well, you can create your own predicate and you create your own within your own vocabulary, and that's okay. That's okay. There are lots of people doing that, but you want to make sure you have some community investment, some kind of community backing behind that. OpaqueNamespace.org is a great place that you can look for community created vocabularies and maintain vocabularies. You don't want to just jam your data into a predicate where it doesn't belong. We've seen enough of that already with MARC and mods and things like that. So use your judgment, but don't be afraid to create a new predicate if you really need to. Just some talking about moving from XML to RDF. This is a pretty simple piece of XML, but this is a little bit harder to model in RDF than it might seem at first because we're probably not going to find a has ownership note predicate anywhere. So how do we deal with this in RDF? Same thing with hierarchical data in XML. We have our publisher and our place of publication, but we need to associate that not just with the object that we're talking about, but with this manufacture event, because we're talking about a specific sort of event in the life cycle of this object. So how do we deal with that in RDF? It's a little bit more information than we can just put in a triple or a set of triples. One way that people have dealt with this is blank nodes. So a blank node is not a URI or a literal. It's an anonymous resource. So you see here we have this manufacturer statement predicate that the object of this triple is this weird _1 identifier, and then that _1 is the subject of another triple that or a set of triples that has our publication information on it. Blank nodes kind of frowned upon though because they increase the complexity and make data processing more difficult, and sometimes systems don't support them very well. The other thing that you can do is create an object to hold that data. And so we're used to thinking about records MARC records or MODS records or Dublin Core records, a record being this sort of self-contained document or thing. And moving to RDF, you sort of have to start thinking about more in a relational database context. So here we have the bibframe manufacturer predicate, and then the object of that triple is another object, which is a provider object. And so this is sort of equivalent to creating like a provider's table or a publisher's table in a relational database. And then in that table or in a separate set of triples, that's when that's where we put the information about that provider. Another problem with RDF is the lack of order. So if you put your data in a triple store, you're not guaranteed to get the data back in any order. And so that can be a problem when we have something like a scholarly publication where the order of the authors is something that we really need to preserve. So how can we deal with that in RDF? This is one approach that we've kind of come up with where basically we've created a new predicate called name order in the opaque namespace, which actually doesn't really exist yet, just theoretical. And then the object of that triple is basically an array of creator objects, and those creator objects are represented by other triples in our triple store. So this is a little funky. I'd love to hear if anyone has better approaches to solving this problem.
So I'm very briefly and very quickly going to go over using linked data here. So real-time lookup is oftentimes a bottleneck, and data providers are not always available. So if you look at id.loc.gov/robots.txt, there's actually a rate limit of only one request every 3 seconds, which is quite limiting. And if you try to use them actually for any non-trivial use case, oftentimes you'll just end up getting blocked because they're not wanting you to use their site for high traffic uses. So the solution to that is basically you're going to have to cache everything that you want to use locally in that case. I don't have time to go over that now, but in the Rails community, we are using linked data fragments, a solution that we're coming up with. It's a little bit different in the fact that we're not making data available, but instead kind of using it as a layer to talk to different caching layers. So like you can have Armada or something else behind it, and it would do the translation to that caching layer for you. The caveat is that your cached linked data may not be as up-to-date because it's no longer on the web. Like the last LCHH batch download is only updated in March 2014, and I'd guess there's been updates since then. And the advantage of doing that kind of thing is that you get all this performance response and you get the standard interfaces, then you can build shared code for things like metadata enrichment interfaces, since autocomplete oftentimes doesn't give you enough context to actually complete a form. So in here you get like broader and narrower terms and alt labels and things like that to select from, rather than just trying to select it from a single label you're getting back in an autocomplete. Or this example from Villanova that will also be part of that gem, that's a quite slick interface of being able to get more than just the label. You can actually get to the broader and narrower concepts. There's also some controlled vocabulary managers that I have slides for that you can look at later on. So if you need to actually publish your data, the Oregon Digital one is currently available and is the best one that I know of in the Hydra Rails community. It currently runs the opaque namespace.org that we mentioned before. There's also one I've written for another use case, but again, you can look at that on your own. So we'll get to the conclusions, which is that, is it worth it? Migration is never painless. It always is going to take effort and time for that to occur. And you have to wonder and question, what are the real benefits to it? Oftentimes, people who are using your public repository won't be able to tell the difference if you're using linked data or XML or database to public that or to power that site itself. And just because your data is in RDF, it doesn't instantly make it aggregatable or harvestable, because of the fact that there is a lot of different uses of the predicates and a lot of different use cases in terms of how that data is used in those systems.
So the answer is maybe. So yeah, when tightly defined data structures and when people are following the rules, then yeah, this stuff can work. So the theory is strong, the practice is still catching up. And the other thing is, like, this is just kind of where things are going, and you're going to have to deal with it. Just to be real about it. As systems move in this direction, it's just something that we're all going to have to deal with. So we have lots more slides about resources, the further links, further reading. The slides will be up on the code4lib site. So thank you.
Right. And thank you. Our next talk is How Not to Waste Catalogers' Time, Making the Most of Subject Headings, John Mark Ockerbloom. Let's find your... Oh, right there. Okay. And we're just going to presenter view. Great. All good.
Well, good morning. I'm thrilled to finally be at code4lib. I'm seeing so many people in this room do great work these last 10 years, and what I've seen here the past couple of days at this conference has also impressed me to no end. Right now, I'd like to focus on the work that catalogers do and how this community can make the best use of that work. I'm not sure what sort of representation catalogers have in code4lib, but I know there are some of you here. So can I just see a show of hands? How many of you consider yourself catalogers in some capacity or another? Pretty good. Thank you. Glad to see you. Thank you for being here. I really love what you do. A lot of the work I've been hearing here fundamentally depends on data, and a lot of that data has been created by catalogers. But when I look at the work that I've seen catalogers produce and the OPACs and discovery systems I've seen, I worry that many coders are overlooking important aspects of how catalogers describe resources, particularly when it comes to subjects. And I worry that this means that we're wasting their time. In the process, we're also wasting the time of our library's users, who still depend on subject descriptions for resource discovery. So yesterday, for instance, we heard about how archivists were finding it increasingly important to include descriptions of the subjects of archives into their EADs to direct researchers to archival materials they might overlook, particularly when those materials aren't online. And even when full text is searchable online, simple term frequency searching doesn't turn up the most relevant text in many cases, and it certainly doesn't when we're just searching metadata, as we'll see in a bit. For instance, in formal cataloging, we have standard identifiers for concepts. And yesterday, Christina Harlow and Missy Elliott told us why standardizing conceptual identifiers is awesome and challenging. But if it's done right, we can bring together a wide variety of works across our library that deal with common concepts. And not only that, but we can use those same identifiers to explore across many libraries, and even outside of libraries, as we'll see later. But catalogers do more than just classify and standardize. They also note the relative importance of subjects in works. In a traditional catalog record, the first subject assigned is the most important one because it's the one that determines where a book will go on a shelf. And the remaining subjects are usually listed in descending order of importance. And those subjects aren't just an unconnected set of concepts. As we've seen in the earlier talk, the subjects are linked together. Catalogers have spent a fair bit of time specifying connections between related subjects, and they've also paid some attention to different ways you might refer to a subject. This is important because no two people classify the world in exactly the same way. And it's easier to navigate other people's organization of the world when you can get a sense of how it all fits together and what it might relate to in your own understanding of the world. Unfortunately, too many library catalog and discovery systems don't do much to help users take advantage of that rich subject organization I've just described. So if you go to Library of Congress's catalog, I don't want to pick on them, but it's a typical catalog. Your options for browsing subjects are pretty limited. You can do a linear call number browse, I'm not showing you that, or you can do an alphabetic subject browse like you see here. So if you've been out here on the historic sites and gotten interested in the American Revolution and decide to browse that subject, well, first you'll be offered 39 books that were cataloged with FAST. But you'll have to click on other links to find the more than 2,000 books on the Revolution that were cataloged with LCSH. And if you click through to the LCSH version of the subject, those 2,000 books by default are simply presented in alphabetical order by title. Now, you've got a few options to change the sort, like to date, for example, but even then, it's awfully hard to find the most relevant books in the subject with what you've got here. Well, okay, you might say, but the catalogs we build nowadays are much more about search than about browse. We've got Solr, we've got faceting, and yes, those are good things, but you can't just throw your subject headings into a term-weighted index and call it a day. We can do better than that. If I put the LCSH subject heading for the American Revolution there in our Solr-based catalog at Penn, the first thing that comes up is a book from 1954. Now, it is a general survey of the Revolution, but it's far from the most important book on the Revolution for readers today. In fact, it's not even the most important book on the Revolution by this author. But it does have a lot of the same terms in my subject search, Revolution, 1775, and 1783, so those term matches are what give it a great score from our basic Solar algorithm. And yes, I can use faceting to narrow down the 11,000 hits I get here into something more manageable. But while faceting lets me slice and dice, it's not so good at letting me explore related subjects that might use different terminology, like the Boston Tea Party or the Battle of Lexington. I can narrow and broaden the set of works I'm seeing, but it's trickier for me to explore laterally. But we can make our catalog smarter when we pay more attention to what catalogers do and how users might want to explore. So here's another way we can view and explore works in a particular subject. This is a catalog I've built of public domain and other freely readable texts that are available on the internet. It organizes works based on an awareness of subjects and of how subjects are cataloged. So the works we see on the top of the list on the right, for instance, tend to be works where United States history, Revolution, 1775 to 1783, was the first subject assigned. Books in that subject, where that subject was further down their subject list, tend to appear further down in this list. Now, I worry about whether I'll still be able to do this when catalogs migrate to RDF. You just heard in the last talk that RDF, unlike MARC, you have to actually go out of your way to preserve property ordering. So here's my plea to you who are developing RDF catalogs. Please go out of your way and preserve subject ordering. Thank you. My catalog also uses other clues in the metadata to try to bring more useful results to the surface. All else being equal, for instance, recent books will appear higher in the list than older books, since they tend to reflect more up-to-date knowledge and scholarship. But again, that importance varies by subjects. You wouldn't want to learn web development from a 20-year-old book, but it might be perfectly fine to have the book that old for math or natural history, for example. Now, here, you don't actually see recent books. My collection, as I said, is mostly public domain, and I don't actually have recent books to show at the top for this subject. So instead, what you're seeing is contemporary books, that is, books that were published during the Revolution or shortly thereafter. We know that works published close to an event can be of special importance in primary source research. And because catalogers have conveniently placed the time period of the event right there in the subject heading, it's easy for us to extract that information and use it to boost the relevance of works close in time to that event. Now, on the left side of the screen, there are various links you can use to explore a cluster of concepts around this subject in various directions. It's kind of like serendipity again, but you have a bit more control over which direction you go in. Now, some of them involve the same kinds of subdivision, addition, and subtraction you get with faceted search. But you can also find related concepts that are expressed in different languages, different terms anyway. From here, for instance, you're only a couple of clicks away from the Battle of Germantown. Now, that's in a revolutionary battle that was fought just about 10 miles north of here. It's near my house. I don't list a lot of books that are just about that battle, but thanks to the network of relationships that are in LCSH, or that I can derive from LCSH, I can cluster those books with books about other things that happened in the same area during the Revolution. Now, some of those books might have more about Germantown, or they might have other things I could be interested in if I'm interested in Germantown. And I don't have to stop just with what's in this collection here. I can click on that link marked Your Library up there and find a bunch of other resources I can use if I head back to Penn or log into our proxy. We use the same subject terminology, after all. Or I can check out another library's collection. The Historical Society of Pennsylvania, I don't know if any of you visited it, it's just a few blocks from here, but they have all kinds of primary sources and archival stuff that has nowhere else. If I want to see what they have, I click on another link to choose a different library, and I find all kinds of items I can look at over there, including the papers of the family whose house was right in the center of the battle. But that's not all. We can use the subject heading that catalogers have assigned, along with some crosswalk data, to find resources outside of libraries. For instance, you can click straight from my catalog subject view of the Battle of Germantown to Wikipedia's page on the Battle of Germantown. And there's that house I was just talking about right there in that picture. You can also get maps of the battle and sites and links to a few dozen online and offline resources with more information, including links back to those hundreds of library collections you got a glimpse of earlier. And this is where we can start linking the LCSH-based cataloging that professionals are doing in libraries with the cataloging that the wider public is doing out in the web. One very simple way of connecting, for instance, is taking the terms that non-librarians use and linking them to terms in library subject vocabularies. So LCSH does not actually have a heading labeled Battle of Germantown, not as a preferred form, not as an alternate form. But we can add that term because it got used in Wikipedia. And again, as with that earlier talk, we can download that data and use it to link to the official Library of Congress headings. And we can also do that with terms from FAST, so that users are more likely to find subjects that are expressed in their own language. The community can help us out in other ways as well. So I don't know if people have seen things about the Open Syllabus Project, but they've collected over 1 million lists of readings assigned by faculty for classes on various subjects. I'd love to be able to mine that data, so if someone's browsing an historical subject, the relevance of resources that are being actively used in history classrooms could show up high in the results list. And the broader community also does a lot of organization and cataloging themselves. In some ways, in fact, they go farther than what library catalogers have been able to do on their own. So our keynote speaker yesterday talked about the Black Lives Matter movement. Now that's been going on for 3 years now. There still is no Library of Congress heading for it. But there's been other things. There's been a Wikipedia article for a long time. I wouldn't say it's the best reference source in the movement, but it does have links to over 150 articles in the media, as well as a prominent link to the activist-run website where you can see what people in the movement are saying. And there are many other ways in which people who care about the issues raised by Black Lives Matter have organized information about it, and it's often on the periphery of librarianship. So sociologists have organized things like the Ferguson Syllabus, and Ed Summers has made an archive of hashtag tweets to document the information sharing that's happening over social media. I've taken some stabs to try to integrate this sort of community cataloging with the more traditional subject clusters you saw earlier. I don't really have time to cover the details because this is just a 15-minute talk. And personally, I've actually needed to step back a bit from it to avoid the sort of overworked burnout that I think Becky Yost is going to be talking about next. But if this sort of linkage interests you, I'd love to talk with you after this session and share ideas. Because really, sharing is what makes possible everything I've talked about here. I couldn't have built the catalog I showed you without a lot of bibliographic data that catalogers have shared through projects like HathiTrust, or authority data that LC has shared, or crosswalking data that OCLC has shared, or article and content data shared from Wikipedia and Wikidata. And I've added a bit of my own data to launch some of these services, like the searches into other library systems and the links to topical subjects in Wikipedia. And I'm sharing that data on GitHub, and I'm happy to collaborate on it. For instance, when you can pick a library to search, there's currently about 900 and some library systems in there. If your library is not on that list, I'd love to add it. You can contact me, or you can submit a pull request. Basically, I'm standing on the shoulders of a lot of giants. And a lot of those giants are catalogers. Now, I hope I've given some of the sense of some of the things that catalogers do, whether they're professionals or amateurs, and how coders can use what they do to better support the information needs and practices of our users. And if this sounds appealing to you, you should check out Mashcat. I think there's a breakout session for them later today. It's both a hashtag and a series of online and face-to-face meetings for discussing how catalogers and coders can work together better. And if you found it useful to listen to me these last 15 minutes, my slide here is places you can find me later on, and I'd be happy to take questions as well. Thank you. All right. So quick. Okay. Thanks. Thank you.
All right. And our next speaker is Becky Yost, who will be talking about the modern day Sisyphus, lib, tech, burnout, and you. I'm looking forward to this. Let's find yours. All right.
Catalogers represent. All right. Good morning, everyone. Despite your best efforts, I am back presenting this year, this time on Burnout. Now, when I first proposed this topic, I had a general tone and structure in mind. However, after some reflection in the last few months, this presentation took a different route than first anticipated. At least there'll be no stick figure trying to roll a circle up an angled line slide. Now, before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items. This work does not represent the opinions of my current or previous employers. Advance apologies to certain folks. This is going to be a high-level talk. If you want the research behind this talk, the link to the bibliography is posted. An article might also be forthcoming to get more into the complexity of burnout in LibTech. Lastly, I'm going to be touching on abuse and various mental health issues, so please practice self-care, even if that includes needing to leave the room. Now, in order for you to pay attention to the entire presentation, I ask that you memorize these three numbers: 415, 70, 4,000. Got it? Good. Let's begin. It would be a safe assumption that most of us have encountered burnout in our professional and personal lives. A burnt out person is exhausted, cynical, frustrated, leading to subpar work performance. The wheel spins, but you're stuck in place. A better way to approach what burnout is comes from Herbert Freudenberger and Gail North. They viewed burnout as a series of phases. The slide shows those 12 phases. I'd like to note two things. These phases are not sequential. You can experience any number of these phases at any time during burnout. For example, you can be withdrawn, which then drives you to work harder and change your behavior as a result, which then leads to depression. Speaking of depression, burnout and depression share many of the similar symptoms, but they are not the same. Maria Accardi wrote on this very topic for List Mental Health Week earlier this year, where she found that her burnout was masking serious depression. How do you tell the difference between the two? It's almost impossible at times. In Maria's case, it took a lot of self-awareness, time, and trial and error. Now, why am I specifically talking about LibTech burnout? What is so special about us that warrants attention? LibTech straddles two fields that, though having their own cultures and ecosystems, share a good number of cultural traits, including traits that are markers for higher burnout rates. Both fields deal with internal and external pressures to operate within tight resource constraints, while at the same time expected to produce high-quality products and services. Each field describes this reality with different terminology, but they are more or less the same reality. And then we have the invisible, often under-recognized or unrecognized work being done in both fields in the form of emotional labor. Emotional labor, first defined by Arlie Hochschild, is the act of regulating emotions to conform to certain rules and expectations while interacting with customers or coworkers. Service professions, like librarianship, exhibit a higher level of emotional labor requirements, partially due to the feminine nature of these professions. One thing that might cause some of you to pause is that IT does indeed perform a high level of emotional labor. As the technology field evolved over the last few decades, the focus on service to both internal and external users grew, and technology workers are increasingly expected to develop and maintain interpersonal relationships and customer relations and in workplace collaborations. Overall, both fields are more dispositioned for higher burnout rates due to service aspects, high work expectations, and workloads in each field. For those of you who would like a visual representation of what we face in LibTech, with apologies to Eli. Since we are in a unique position between these two fields, it would be wise for us not only to recognize the signs of burnout, but also ways to prevent and to recover from it. This slide shows some of the more effective ways in prevention and treatment, ranging from taking breaks from the office and reprioritizing projects, to therapy and work-life balance. But you know what? We've heard all this before. There are a ton of talks, articles, and posts about what you can do in preventing and recovering from burnout for yourself. There are many in the bibliography of this talk. Instead, this talk is for the rest of us. This talk takes into consideration one thing that many of these burnout talks do not. Burnout is a social contagion. If one of us is burnt out, then there's a higher chance of burnout for those close around that one person. We are surrounded by burnout just by the very nature of our jobs. You do the math. How do we address this contagious factor? I've identified at least 3 groups in which we can take on burnout in an organized front. You might be wondering where you fall into a particular group. There will be overlaps. There will be things you cannot do due to circumstances outside of your control. Nonetheless, this talk shifts some of the onus of burnout prevention and treatment onto the community, be it at work or in the profession. The first group is colleagues and coworkers. These are the people you work with closely on a daily basis. You are the front line, and you are most likely to notice when a coworker is struggling. How can we, given existing organizational structures and job autonomy, do to address burnout in coworkers? One of the first things we can do is to assess our team's working style. Functional, collaborative teams and departments provide better support for fellow coworkers and helps instill a team culture of shared responsibility and camaraderie. While some competition between coworkers is healthy and necessary, too much focus on competition leads into lack of social support and dysfunctional collaborations and teamwork. Collaborative departments see the value in cross-training and documentation, and they give priority to them. Cross-training and documenting various duties and responsibilities provides a way to lessen the stress of taking on others' tasks when the need arises. An additional way to make things easier for coworkers is to have the cross-training workers work on the documentation with you. This way, you build in user testing for your docs. Even in collaborative environments, we have trouble saying no from time to time. One way to help mitigate this need to say yes all the time is to build an escape route if we were asking someone to take on something that would be above and beyond their daily duties. Give that person the ability to say no, or the ability to suggest an alternative to address the request without having to choose all or nothing. Overall, load balance responsibly. Lastly, pay attention to your colleagues. Again, we work closely with them for the majority of our workday. If you start to see someone struggling, say something. Do not give unsolicited advice or try to solve their problem. Just a sincere check-in, like, hey, is everything going okay? Or, you've been stressed lately. Always followed by, is there anything I can do? Overall, be present for that person. They might brush you off and say everything is fine and they don't need anything, but if they're still struggling, don't stop after the first brush off, the second, or the third. And this is where the first number I asked you to memorize comes in. 415 refers to a date, April 2015. This was the date after many brush-offs. I did not brush off a check-in from a close colleague regarding my well-being. So, colleagues and coworkers, I ask you to do something. The act of doing something, no matter how small you think the action is all it can take to start addressing a problem. Managers are the second group. We have power baked into the organizational structures of our workplaces to influence the culture and tone of the team we oversee. Even if your formal role is not management, any time you are leading a group or responsible for guiding others in their work responsibilities, you inherit the power dynamics of the manager-employee relationship. Like it or not, you have that power. So you might as well use that power to make the team environment safer for your staff. The first way to do this is to give your staff clear and explicit agency. Give them what they need to do their job and then get the hell out of their way. Give them the power to say no without serious repercussions. Cultivate an environment where staff feel more comfortable sharing their emotions and stresses without fear of appearing weak or incompetent at their duties. Acknowledge that these emotions and stresses come from the emotional labor that is inherent in their jobs. Emotional labor is invisible labor to most folks. The simple acknowledgement and recognition of the important role that emotional labor plays in staff's jobs can be very powerful in terms of starting to address burnout in your team. Second, last time I checked, unicorns aren't real, so why are we building positions that require them? Unicorn positions are structured on an unrealistic model of skill sets, responsibilities, and expectations that one person can handle in a healthy manner. We are mainstreaming positions built for those few outliers that have such a skill set and can take on such a workload. As a manager, you too have the power to say no. So when asked to do more with less, exercise that power. Better yet, be more constructive way. A more constructive way is to ask back what services should be dropped to make room for the new. Hold your ground. If you fall, your team will fall. Last, while making your team's environment safer for your staff to essentially be human at work, you need to recognize your own limits. You're not a therapist or a doctor or a lawyer. You are a manager. Get to know the resources through your workplace, including any employee assistance programs, and make these resources known to your staff. If nothing else, put this information in a place where staff can access it discreetly. The second number is 70. Technically, it's an approximate number, the number of tickets opened within a 3-month period after migrating to a new ILS. There was only myself and my employee doing these tickets, and we were burnt out by the time we reached ticket 70. Staff were not happy, to say the least, and were performing extremely high levels of emotional labor at this time. By acknowledging this emotional labor overload and creating spaces where we could talk about said overload, we created a vital coping strategy for both of us to get through the next few months. The last group encompasses both coworkers and managers. As a community, LibTech has standards and expectations, as well as a culture that is forever evolving based on what pieces of the technology and library worlds we decide to incorporate into LibTech. But as I presented on last year, there are unintended consequences in adopting such practices, values, and expectations into a community space. To rip off of last year's talk, we need to be mindful of how we evolve our culture. More specifically, we must address the fact that many of us have gone through burnout, and yet are part of a community that still produces burnouts at a fast pace. We have a great supportive community in LibTech, and we want you to join us. Just go through that long gauntlet right there. You see, we went through that long gauntlet, and that's what you need to do to earn your place here. But don't worry, if you make it out here, you'll have our full support. In the case of the charming alcoholic, the charming behavior does not negate the alcoholism. A supportive LibTech community does not negate the fact that we still expect others to go through the various abuses, emotional, mental, physical, that are inherent in the practices and expectations of that community. There is a difference between just sustaining and healthy. And now a question related to the third number I had you memorize. Suppose you're burnt out and someone came to your office one day saying that they can help you. This help, however, comes with 2 conditions. An initial down payment, and you have to pay that now or the opportunity goes away. You don't know when the next opportunity will come, if any. How many of you can write a check for $4,000 right now? We keep putting the responsibility of burnout prevention and treatment solely on the individual. The asterisk from the slide of what individuals can do for themselves denotes the fact that only those in secure employment and personal environments can fully act on those strategies. This is why action in both our workplaces and as a community at large is so important. To keep the responsibility solely on the individual for burnout prevention and treatment completely ignores the fact that that person might not have the vacation time to take a break from work, or the agency to take any vacation time for work, or the ability to express their emotions at work without fear of their coworkers or employers seeing that these true feelings as an inability to do their jobs, or to seek medical attention because they do not have health benefits. Or they might not have the ability to move and change jobs without serious repercussions to family, to relationships, and to finances. I had the privilege of having that amount in my checking account. I had the privilege of not having a family or partner to rehome when I moved to Seattle. I had the privilege of taking that opportunity for recovery, and I will do what I can to give that opportunity for those who need it the most in the LibTech community. So you might have noticed that I had 3 groups with 3 numbers. The first 2 groups had 2 succinct action plans. Do something and make it safer. As a community, we need to do those, but there's one thing that the community must do. As I mentioned in the beginning, this talk took a different path than first expected. For those of you who know me, there's been the semi-regular humorous saying of, if you can't be a good example, then be the horrible warning. And I was the horrible warning because, hey, I was on 24/7. My job had me going, all night, all day, and I was working all the time, and I did a lot of stuff, and that was the running joke with a lot of folks and with myself for the longest time. I can't joke about it anymore. Being the horrible warning, in part, broke me. What hurts me is that I see the exact same horrible warning scenario that I was playing out here in LibTech with the people I care about. That's all of you. We still joke. We still expect people to go through what we did. We, as a community, still consciously and implicitly place value on horrible warnings, not as actual warnings, but as thinly veiled admiration to the unhealthy and unsustainable amount of time and energy they pour into their work to inspire us to go down that same path. So, this talk was as much as for me as for you. A reminder for us to what we need to do as coworkers, as managers, and as community members. In short, if I have to drag myself internally, kicking and screaming, not to be the horrible warning anymore, you fucking bet I'm taking all you with me. With that, the action plan for us, the community, no more horrible warnings.
Thank you, Becky. Sorry. So that's our talks for the morning. We are going to take a break now, but before we do that, I want to make a couple announcements. The first is, one second. Very unprofessional of me. I want to thank I've already announced our scholarship winners, but I did not thank our scholarship sponsors. And we would not have had the scholarship recipients this year that we had if it hadn't been for our absolutely wonderful sponsors. So I want to thank MIT Libraries for sponsoring diversity scholarship winners. I want to thank Penn State University Libraries, the DPLA, Drexel University School of Computing and Informatics, Retochromer AV Preservation, and then Mark Matienzo, and finally, lots of contributions from the code4lib community, and Ashley Bluer, who is another, who is also working on our live stream, was another person who donated. So thank you very much. The community absolutely needs it and appreciates it. So a huge round of applause for our Diversity Scholarship Fund. And two more announcements before we break. The first is that Lightning Talk signups for tomorrow Sound guy, way to go. Don't you have any Missy Elliott? Come on. All right, where are we at? And Alasak Sanavonse. Sorry. All right, and one. I think we have one more. We'll do one more. Yeah. All right, last one, and then lightning talks. Looks like it worked. Got people back. Bobby Fox, come on down. Get your prize. There must be something about that seats right there. Two people next to each other. All right. Okay, and with the giveaways now done, we will move on to the lightning talks. Can the lightning talk presenters come on up and line up in the order you are listed up here? Are you first? Yeah. All right, well, that'll work out, yeah. Let's get you up here. But you're on desktop?
Yeah, just
let me minimize that. And let's find you. And just actually use that one.
this one.
Yeah.
There we go.
All right. And there we go.
Alrighty, hi everyone, my name is Ian Walls, I'm with UMass Amherst Libraries, and I just wanted to talk today real quick about a side project that I've been doing kind of on spec to build a physical device for recording desk interactions. So I'm sure, like a lot of you, our library is trying to build a culture of assessment. This is really important, show that we're making data-driven decisions, we're being mission-aligned, all that good stuff, and that means collecting desk interactions, which we've done for, I don't know, centuries or so, but yeah, it's sort of mission critical now. We're using something, a modified version of the lead scale, references later. Basically that translates to, is interaction 1, easy, 2, medium, or 3, hard. It's originally a 6-point scale, but that was a 3, or 2 hard. So we're using lib analytics to do the data recording right now. So yeah, there we are. So why am I talking? What's the problem? Why am I talking about this at all? Well, if you look closely at that form, that's a lot of little radio buttons to record the concept of 1, 2, or 3. You've got where you are, and that doesn't change from desk to desk. You've got who you are, and that doesn't change because it's a generic student account usually. It's always walk-in type, and the rest of the stuff is actually not used regularly anyway. So not exactly a super ergonomic way to go. And I don't know about you, but our desks get busy. Okay, maybe not, Deathly Hallows goes on sale busy, but you get the picture. And one super fun thing we found is that, I don't know about your barcode scanners, but ours don't scan directly to the ILS client. They scan into the active window. And when that active window is not the ILS, like say a web form, you might wind up checking out things to the wrong people, or not at all. And we had that a couple times, so this is an issue. It's a usability issue. So from the title, you knew this was going to happen, right? Okay, so we'll just skip over. So let's look at building something that is like a physical dedicated device to doing this purpose, something as easy as the easy button, or since it's 3 buttons, maybe more like the movie sign device from MST3K. This has been done. Y'all may remember from code4lib Journal 2013, Tim Rybarek and Jonathan Juncker, I'm sorry if I butchered your names, from Brock University built this tabulatron. It's a very similar kind of thing, so this is not a new revolutionary concept. So how does this work? The human interface device that we're proposing is connected to the service station over USB, and the way that I'm looking to do it, the way it's a little bit different than the Tabulatron, they used an Arduino Uno, which can only send serial data over USB, so they had to have a custom processing script to be able to decode that and do anything with it. If we use a different chip, we can actually simulate a human interface device like a keyboard, and then we can just use any old hotkey tool, macro thing that you want, whatever's appropriate for your production environment, and then script that to send it off to whatever data repository you may want. They used Google Forms or Google Drive, whatever at Brock, but do what works. So here's the physical build: a Teensy 2.0 for $15.95 from Adafruit, 3 arcade buttons, large, for $5.95 each, 3D printed case, maybe $1. I haven't printed it yet. We pay by the gram. And wire, a USB cable, a mini, not micro, so not what you're charging your phone with, but that, some solder, stuff that you either should have or you will hopefully get. So total cost of the build, about $35. That's the cost of a Raspberry Pi without any of the stuff to actually make a Raspberry Pi work. So I said it was a keyboard, so I picked some key mappings that I figured were non-conflict. If anyone knows better about this, please let me know so I can change it soon. Control-Alt F6, Control-Alt F7, and Control-Alt F8 seem to be as non-conflict as I could find. So exercise left to the reader is the actual setting up of what your hotkey tool is going to be, where your data repository will be, not really the subject of this talk. Prototyping, this isn't just hot air. I have built stuff. There is code. See, there's a snippet of code. I've written that. There's a photo of the device that I was prototyping it on the Uno. It's actually on the Teensy now. So there's a thing. That's a screenshot from my SketchUp. I haven't tried printing it yet. You can see there's no bottom or hole for the USB cable, but this isn't just vapor tech. Some other uses for this, if you're not doing a 1, 2, 3 scale recording, you could do this as a call for backup button. I need a clerk, I need a librarian, I need security. You could do it as a patron-facing thing. How are we doing? Did you like your experience? Other ideas? References? Thank you.
Our next talk is transferring digital records to the archives. Let's get this up. Yeah. How are we gonna make there? Desktop. Probably right there.
I don't know where it is. Oh, there it is. No. Yes. At SUNY Albany, and I'm going to talk about transferring board and digital records to the archives, Word files, Office documents, PDFs, from people on and off campus to the university archives. So I have a pretty basic Python app called Ants that does this. It runs, it gathers file system metadata and runs checksums in records' original creation environment and transfers them over existing network infrastructure, FTP, or Google Drive. So I'm going to do a quick demonstration, if this will play. So it sits really on top of Windows Explorer. You can just open up the exe and browse, or if you select any file or folder in Windows Explorer, there's a little link that says send to the archives with Ants. And then what you can't see here is it asks to elevate UAC privileges, which is going to let us access our disk as a device. And it's a pretty basic window where you can add description at any file or folder if that's practical. Navigate the directory tree and select only the records that you want to transfer. So hopefully this encourages people to select records in the original creation environment. You can add some accession level metadata, and there's some configuration options, but this can come pre-configured, so generally the users don't have to worry about any of these options. So we're gonna do a transfer over Google Drive. So now what this does now is if you have the correct level of permissions, it can access the disk as a device and runs MFT record, which is a pretty basic digital forensics tool, and reads the 4 timestamps that's available to the operating system and also the 4 file name timestamps. It then bags the directory, compresses it, and then it opens up the Google Drive authentication workflow. So it'll just pop open a browser and ask you to enter credentials, and then it will push the files up to Google Drive. As you can see, showing progress to the user is the biggest problem to this project so far. It's still a little wonky, and it also sends a notification email, sends you your correct, and then we'll take a look at what it packages. So it's just a basic bag. So you have your data in it, and then this is an XML metadata file that comes included. So it has some session level metadata, a timestamp when it was submitted, an identifier. And for each file and folder, you have 8 timestamps and some curatorial events that aren't very machine readable right now, an identifier, the original path. So it gets a nice little structure for us to do things later with. So this works, sort of. There's still some usability issues. I'm not sure it's sustainable. I'm pretty sure it's not scalable. I think we can get it to the point that it'll work okay for us, and I think why I wrote this is because I really didn't have a better idea for this problem. So I think this will offer a real-world use case and a proof of concept, so we can move forward towards a solution. So in that spirit, the things that I've learned in this project is that we need to package consistent accessions with metadata. So this is going to help us later down in arrangement description and making things available. Dates have been really important for archival description, and getting those timestamps is going to be valuable later on the line and going to make us more efficient with our workflows. The process needs to be defined by the actual records creators, and these are all going to be different. People have different environments where they manage their records, and it's all going to have to be very usable for them. This is a desktop problem. You can't really run hashes and get file system metadata from a web app without some sort of client. And also, this is an authentication problem. I think that's why archives are still using Box, Dropbox, and Google Drive, is that that's really the value we're getting out of it, is the authentication. And I think both of these things are things we tend to avoid doing now. So I think that's why this problem sort of persists. But another thing is that I think we can do this now. The tools are getting pretty easy, and even the forensics tools, is that if we package them well, we can get a good amount of metadata and consistent packages before it's sent to the archives, and that's going to sort of affect our whole workflow. So, thank you.
All right. In the browser. All right. Let's find that. There you go. And pop you out. Awesome.
We're good? All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Todd Stauffer. I'm with NCSU Libraries, and I'm here to talk about saving Lentil and changes to the Instagram API. So for those of you that don't know, Lentil is an open source app that is an Instagram harvester that was developed by NCSU Libraries around 2013. It requires the basic and public content API scope permissions from Instagram. And without proper approval from Instagram now, the app is scheduled to stop working in June. So what happened recently is that Instagram decided to go through a fairly major API change, and now every new app that you create requires their express permission levels to be granted through a submission process. So whereas before it was a lot easier, you could just build it, it would reach their endpoints, and you would get whatever data you were wanting. They've changed that situation quite a bit. So that happened in November, and we were kind of surprised by that abrupt change. And so we started looking into the formal permissions review process to see how that would go. And what Instagram has listed is a limited set of valid use cases that they deem appropriate for apps that they will approve. So here we can take a look at, these are the 3 valid use cases that they list out. The top one seems like it would work with our app. So the way that Lentil works is it harvests based on a hashtag. So we had My Hunt Library was kind of the hashtag that we were using to collect any images that students posted using that. But in Instagram's changes, this help individuals share their own content, which is really what we're doing. They want you to get explicit permission from the individual. So they would sign into your app, required to grant you permissions to then harvest their items, which didn't really work for us because we wanted it to be based on hashtags. We didn't want folks to have to go through extra processes to share their images back with the library before we could harvest them. And then you notice the other 2 are more geared towards commercial uses. So they talk a lot about brands and advertisers, broadcasters, and publishers. And while we are all of those things, we're also different than all of those things. So it's kind of unclear where we fit in that situation there. So like I mentioned before, all of the clients that are created now are placed into a sandbox mode. And this will work for a lot of apps. So if you're trying to just collect on one hashtag from your account, or maybe you have 5 accounts within your organization, you can add those all as sandbox users and it will still collect. But if you're trying to reach the broader Instagram community at all, this won't work. It's limited to 10 users and only their 20 most recent photos. So in an archival context, if we're trying to grab as many photos as possible and put them in our archives, we obviously don't want just 10 users and 20 of their photos. To get out of Sandbox, you need to be granted permissions, and it has to be approved by Instagram. And this is the most frustrating part of this process. So the permissions review, there's a few different submission requirements. You have to have a working demo version at least of your product, of your app, a privacy policy. Then you need to write out valid use case documentation, have a screencast of your app, and then for any additional permissions that you require, you have to write a separate use case for those. And then you package that all up and submit it to Instagram. And where that gets difficult is there's no communication back and forth. You either get approved or denied, and you don't know why. From what I've found so far of other folks that have gotten apps denied, they just say it doesn't fit in with the valid use case. So in our situation, I've submitted essentially the same app 3 times. 2 of them were non-production apps because we didn't want to lose access. Currently, apps are still working until June, so we didn't want to lose access to our production apps. So I've submitted the same app 3 times with mildly different documentation, and it's been approved twice and rejected once for the same exact functionality. So be specific, pick a valid use case, quote their API use cases back to them and say, this is how I feel it fits in with your situation. Be persistent, so just keep on resubmitting every time that they reject, and hopefully somebody will approve it. And be lucky, because eventually maybe they will approve it, and then you have a valid key and it'll work. But I think that this can bring up a kind of broader talk about how we work with these APIs and these corporations in general, where there's no direct line of communication, particularly for our kind of subset of organizations, and if there's ways that we can reach out to those communities and open up a little bit more so that we can have a dialogue back and forth to explain how our uses are similar, but in a non-commercial way, tackle that issue. So here's some links for more info if you want to check out Lentil. And I've also put up some of the sample submission docs that I've done, so you can check those out. Thanks.
And our next talk, why cats prefer boxes over fancy toys. Where's yours?
Mine was
Is it
saved on the
desktop?
desktop.
All right. Let's get you going.
So, hello everyone. I'm Kate Dybel from the University of Washington Libraries, and my second ever lightning talk at code4lib. So, why do cats prefer the box over the fancy toy? Now, those of you who don't understand this meme, it's been around for quite a while, and it's been spread around. The cat, when presented with a fancy toy or bed, will just, choose to go into the box that it came in. Now, I'd like to tell you I'd be able to explain this weird bit of cat psychology, but that's not really what this talk is about. It's connected, but it's really about sharing code solutions for all sizes of institutions. And to kind of just start this off, I want to explain what I mean by sharing code solutions. So here, by the way, since it's not really about cats, I have put tons of photos of my cat on my slides for your enjoyment. So what do I mean by sharing code solutions? Well, what I mean is, I'm not talking about like large open source projects here, like Hydra, Islandora. I'm talking about when we decide to post our code that we've written to deal with some issue with a third-party vendor product or something, where it's just a little fix or something. In particular, let's talk about, our discovery systems, ILSs, like Primo. There are lots of like little code snippets and stuff out there. Virginia Commonwealth University has a very popular one on GitHub. Notre Dame does as well. And so, a lot of people are trying to customize their Primo instances. So this is what Primo looks like out of the box. And this is what my job as one of the developers at the UW has changed our Primo instance into. Quite a bit of changes there. Pretty big, besides just standard branding, I've done improved usability, more accessibility, some new responsiveness, new functionality, all sorts of things with it. So people see this and they often ask, well, can I have your code? But they don't want all my code. They just want the code for just one tiny little bit. And I can go to them and say, okay, yeah, are you sure you want that? It's 4 HTML files. It's only 236 lines. One giant CSS file, over 5,000. One JavaScript file. By the way, the Java and CSS are actually all mashed together so that it's less web requests. And, they look at this and go, it's like, you sure you really want to do that just to find the one little bit in there? And let's face it, dissecting code takes skills. It's not even easy for seasoned technologists. I worked for years as a programming instructor. I have read student code that will boggle most of your minds, and it's still hard for me to do coming from a lot of developers. And most importantly, not all libraries have technologists on staff, have developers on staff. We need to share our code better, so that the smaller, more resource-constrained libraries can do this. So how can we do this? One, don't share as a monolithic repository. Don't share independent component. Share things as independent components. But some of you are going like, well, GitHub has gist, Bitbucket has snippets. You could do a JS fiddle, but even those don't really help. They have mixed support for what I'm talking about, hard to show dependencies, all sorts of things. So we need to share even better. We need to be able to show and handle the dependencies that exist between our shared code solutions. We need the customization to be easy. No having to dive into various random lines that are commented in the JavaScript. It needs to be easy deployment. Ideally, like, hey, stick these 3 files in, change this in an HTML file, you're golden. So I'm involved with some approaches on this. University of Washington is part of the Orbis Cascade Alliance, and we're working on putting together a Primo software toolkit of just a select few independent fixes that it's going to be available in about mid-April or so. We're wrapping it up right now. I'm also building this very giant Primo widget library, which it's a work in progress. That's the Bitbucket repo up there. I'll post my slides later. And it's pretty much trying to just take my code and break it into small parts. Now, there are a lot of the dependencies are listed in each one, their installation instructions. I'm trying to make this as user-friendly as possible. But guess what? It's really not enough. It's a work in progress, and I realize that. Tracking dependencies still takes expertise. Customization is still an issue. So I'm trying to do some ongoing work. I'm going to keep adding more widgets, which most of this is actually off my regular time. This is like the lowest priority on all of the jobs I have going on. I also want to build a customized downloader tool for this, and I am running out of time. So just real briefly, why does this have to do with cats, toys, and boxes? Well, libraries use things out of the box. Most small libraries have to stick with what's in the repo. And there's that. Dang, my timing was off.
All right, our next talk is Michael Gibney with Excelaminar. Sorry, I'm butchering it. I'm sorry.
I think that's right.
Are you on the desktop or?
It's on the browser, Chrome. I think it was minimized over here somewhere.
Let's see. Excel.
There we go.
There we go. Come on now.
And I think you can get a view. Like, oh, perfect.
Do it.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you. So I want to talk briefly about a tool that has been really been developed at University of Pennsylvania and has been really useful to us in working with large amounts of XML. So XML everybody is familiar with, and there are a couple of use cases that I want to mention and have in mind. One of them is dumps of bibliographic metadata. MarkXML is very common, and when you're talking about a dump of catalog metadata, you're talking about a lot of XML. And XML, and it's XML that is, despite the sort of document-centric nature of XML as a serialization format, it really is a sequence of more or less independent records. And so one of the things that I certainly have encountered in dealing with XML is that you really don't care. The distinctions of what constitutes a single document for the purposes of processing and transfer is kind of arbitrary. And so you're forced to choose, like, I don't know, 50,000 records or something like that. And you also end up doing a lot of file system I/O if you're doing multiple transformations and bundling things up in ways that is very difficult to modularize. So XML is serial by nature and document-centric, and so this tool does a number of things. It joins multiple XML streams together, so think like taking multiple small documents and stitching them together into one. It can also split large XML streams, like arbitrarily large, like millions of records, into smaller chunks in a configurable way. Also, by treating XML as sequences of independent records and allowing you to split it in arbitrary ways, it allows you to take advantage of parallel processing and subdividing records on failure of transformations using XSLT. And there's also some other things in there, like the ability to read from a database using an SQL query and represent that as flat XML, and then also take that flat XML and sort of stitch it together in a hierarchical way to take advantage of the hierarchical nature of XML. And yeah, configurable modules for output, including writing to files, writing to standard out, and posting to URL, etc. So this is documented at the project repository at GitHub, UPenn Libraries, XML Laminar. It's kind of a weird name, so it's quite Googleable. I'll have the link at the end of the slides. So there's a focus on the command line interface here, and that's for the ease of adoption and integrating with existing workflows. And really, I put a lot of effort into making this usable and configurable and flexible. So this is one example here where, just to follow along what's going on here, you see we're finding a bunch of XML files in a directory, piping that to XML Laminar program, which reads those together, joins them all. The -A flag joins everything together, then splits it into chunks of size 10, and then outputs it gzipped, which is the Z, to a base name of file defined as temp out.xml. And so that'll end up looking like out.xml 0001, 0002, 3, etc., like that. Just another example here, reading from the database. I've omitted some configuration options, including defining how it connects to the database, and you can see that it is allowing you to separately specify the selection of records and the retrieval of information associated with those records. And it's designed so that the pipeline is Java process internal. XSLT transformations on multiple files. You can see here we're finding XML files, and transforming them, and it will, you've defined a record XPath to be able to log the ID of records that fail transformation. So it's fault tolerant, and in the world where you can't depend on everything working fine always, it's nice to be able to not fail completely. That's all. 1 second. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Our next talk is resolving metadata from DOI.
And are you on the? There you go.
Hi, I'm Michael Burkowski from University of Minnesota Libraries. And when I put this lightning talk on the schedule yesterday, my thinking was to focus on our own specific implementation of getting metadata back from DOI strings that we have collected at the University of Minnesota Libraries, which is a Ruby-based library that's up on GitHub. But it turned out, as I was preparing the slides, that how we get there and the underlying technology in how that happens is a lot more important and probably of a lot more use to you here in the audience. And so luckily, this lightning talk can turn into the like 4.5-minute aside that I think Damien Katz would have liked to take on HTTP content negotiation during the linked open dime novels talk this morning. So hopefully this will be enough of a quick overview that you can start thinking about adding content negotiation to your normal toolbox of things you might ever want to use. So the gist of it is you need to provide in HTTP requests that you're sending to some service, or if you're the server providing it, you need to respond to this, provide an accept header that lists out the content types that you want to get back from the thing. So normally if you have a DOI and you hit the link, send it to the proxy resolver at doi.org, you will get redirected to probably some vended site or a third-party site that serves you the content that you wanted. But you can ask for other things. You can ask for JSON back. You can ask for XML formats back. You can ask for different types of citation formats back. And it's very easy to do. All you need to do is send that accept header with the content types that you want in a comma-separated list. And so you can also give preferential treatment to one or the other. In this case, I've set that little Q value there to 1.0 is the highest possible value to the JSON format. That's the one I want. But if it's not available, I'll take an XML format in return. So looking at this in a curl example that you could copy-paste from this slide, and it should run, we set the header, pass in the URL that we're going to, which is passing through the doi.org proxy service, and highlighted down at the bottom there is the accept header that's being sent in the request. And you can't forget to follow any location headers that the thing gives you back, because in a lot of cases it's going to actually redirect you to another place that has the specific format you're asking for. So in this case, the capital L flag to curl, and you can see it's sent back that location header down at the bottom. So curl will follow that. And the next thing you need to do is pay attention to what content type it gave you back, because you have probably asked or possibly asked for more than one. So in this case, it sent back the JSON type. And there's our JSON. So that will come back in the response body. Or maybe it was XML that we got, or maybe even a citation. So doing this with Ruby turns out to be somewhat less important for us. We have a library called Simple DOI that is at that GitHub URL. You will want to look at the DOI handbooks section on content negotiation, because it explains this pretty well for this use case, but this is applicable to all kinds of other places where you might use content negotiation. And for the types of formats that you can get back for DOI metadata in particular, those are listed at the Crossref and DataCite documentation at that bottom link there. And that's all I have for you today. That's me. I'm typically in the IRC if you have any questions for me, or get me on Twitter. Or Slack channel as well. Thanks very much.
Our next talk is Quick Search, now open source. And are you on browser?
Oh, right there.
And there you go.
All right, hi. My name is Evan Beswick, and I'm from NCSU Libraries. And last week, we open sourced Quick Search finally. So here's the URL to the GitHub repo. I'll put that back up at the end of the talk. So what is Quick Search? It's NCSU's single search platform with Beno box-style results. We originally launched this in 2005 to our users, and we rewrote it a couple years ago using Ruby on Rails. And at this point, I'd like to give a shout out to Corey Lown, who wrote a lot of this code, and Jason Rinaldo, who provided feedback and guidance while we were writing it, and also his mad Ruby skills. So there's what it looks like. Oh, it's not full screen, so you can't see our header, but that's basically what our implementation looks like. There's a smaller view of the whole page, which you might not be able to see very well. So the features of the open source version, it's really easy to get up and running, get a development environment up and running, or just to test it out. We've included Vagrant files and Ansible playbooks. So really you can get it up and running, spin up a dev server in a few minutes with one command. It's modular and extensible, so we've modularized searchers and themes. We have statistic collection both locally, they're anonymous, as well as Google Analytics, best bets, and most of the other features that are available in our implementation of Quick Search. So what are searchers? They're plugins that provide search functionality for a particular library service, and these are published as Ruby gems in Quick Search, and they're very easy to write. How easy, you ask? So here's a quick example of the minimum viable searcher. So the things to note about this, we subclass the Quick Search searcher class. This one's for a fake catalog. And then Quick Search only requires that you define two methods in your searcher, at least. So the first one's search, which does the search, and the second one's the results, which just returns a list of results. You don't even need to define a template to render the results if you don't want to. Quick Search knows about common fields in results like title, link, author, date, thumbnail, for example, and a few other ones. To include this into your Quick Search implementation, you just include the gem in the gem file, and you just tell in Quick Search config that you want to use my catalog as a searcher. And then you put it into your search results page, and you use the Quick Search's render module helper, and just put the name of your module in there, and you can pass in a view alternately if you want a customized view. And then that's it. So, I mean, maybe a few more things if you wanted to release your searcher or run it in production. So you can, as I said, add a custom results template. You might want to use configuration values so that other people can override and, add API keys and things like that. And do internationalization or, override the default error messages and, see more results, strings and everything. We've released a few searchers so far, so here's a list of them. We're still working on releasing the sum, and we just need to find out if that's breaking the terms of their API before we put out that code. And as I said earlier, themes are also modular. These are also published as Ruby gems, so you can either create your own theme entirely from scratch, or you can override parts of ones that are already available, so it's really easy to put in your own header or footer. So we've released a generic theme. It's responsive and based on the Foundation CSS framework. It looks a lot like the theme that I just showed you for NCSU Libraries, but there's what it looks like. And as I said, statistic collection is automatic. So as soon as you say you want to use this searcher in your Quick Search, automatically starts collecting statistics for that. And we provide a nice view to kind of see how your modules are doing, the searches, all anonymous, how the best bets are doing, how many times they've been served, how many times they've been clicked on, in a nice view like this. Just a disclaimer, this is extracted from our production code, but it's still fairly early stage. So we've been running the code in production for a couple of years, but we just modularized it and everything. So but that being said, we still have a few to-do items, so we improved the documentation, fixed the tests that we broke when we modularized, port over a couple more features that haven't been yet, like type ahead feature that we have in our NCSU version, and then also make the core a Rails engine. But we want to work with you, so if you have any more questions about this, you're thinking of trying it out or using it, just contact me. You can see me after this, or email, Twitter. There's the GitHub repo, and at the bottom is our implementation of Quick Search. Thank you.
You're on the desktop? All right. Let's,
Top middle. Yeah, those ones.
Yep. All right. And our next talk is using Sphinx for documentation.
Hi, so my name's Dan Galeen. I'm the Atom Program Manager with Artifactual Systems. And this is my first code for lib. And I wasn't intending on talking, but in the spirit of participation, I decided at the last minute to reuse some slides actually that I presented at code4lib BC in the fall. So a little bit of background about this project. So I'm going to be talking in the context of our project Atom, or Access to Memory. It's an open source application for standards-based description and access. And basically, it was first developed with sponsorship from the International Council on Archives, starting in around 2007. When we were developing it, the idea was, okay, well, let's generalize the base framework, and we'll call that Qubit. And then we'll do different themes, like IC Atom was the first version, but then we can also make different packages. So we made one called DCB that was packaged for library special collections and whatnot. And then as we got along in time, we had different themes introduced. So we had about 4 themes in the IC Atom version, a different theme in DCB, and then in late 2013, we had a 2.0 release. So in terms of our documentation, this was all kept in wikis at the point, and this meant that for one project, we actually had 3 wikis with 4 different themes and a total change in the interface on the way coming. So this was kind of a nightmare for giving people instructions on how to find things. We'd have to say, okay, for this instance, the button's here, but in this theme, it's on this side, and if you're using this version, we actually remove that module, so go to this page. It was getting a nightmare, and we were looking for something else. And a lot of this we found was actually the problem with the way that wikis are. They can tend to be untended gardens unless you're very conscious about how you're setting them up. There was no real easy way for us to create versioning in our wiki. There was no enforced structure. And oftentimes, because community users were also creating pages, there was often orphan pages that weren't linked to anything else. There was often requests for a PDF version of our documentation, and that just wasn't easily possible. I mean, there's some solutions out there in libraries, but because sometimes people had dropped HTML right into the wiki, then the output of tools like Pandoc or other things like that for conversion was not necessarily consistent. That's where Sphinx came in. So Sphinx is a documentation generator that's open source. It was first created by the Python community as a solution for their documentation needs, but it's since been taken up by hundreds of projects. It builds upon some existing open source projects, restructured text, which is a markup language, and docutils, which is a text processing system. So this is kind of a basic overview of what's going on here. The user will write their documentation in restructured text, and that goes into Sphinx and uses a REST parser and docutils to then generate, based on various builders, the outputs that you want. I've just sort of shown in this image some of the common outputs, PDF, EPUB, and HTML, but there's actually a lot of different builders available, a lot of add-ons, themes, and other goodies that the community's added along the way. So a quick overview of REST and what it looks like. It's fairly familiar if you've ever worked with a markup language. There's You know, you've got the ability to set anchors so you can link to different places. The section headers, you can actually use whatever kind of formatting you want, and Sphinx will figure it out as long as you're consistent. You can add glossary terms, images, or figures with annotations, bolding, emphasis, all this kind of stuff. It includes a whole module of admonitions, which are very useful for adding notes, tips, see alsos, warnings, cautions, hints. You can add links and then reuse them with a simple shorthand, or you can use one-off links. You can drop in code blocks, and there's all kinds of parsers in there, so it'll pretty up what that looks like. There's an example up there of just using it for XML. You basically just declare what language it is, and if there's a parser in there already, it'll handle the rest for you. And of course, standard features like bulleted and lists, numbers. So this is just a brief peek at sort of our side-by-side. I've squished what our code looks like, and then it's themed on the website. So we generate this in HTML, and then we push it to our website. Running short on time here, so these are some of the advantages that we found with Sphinx, and I just want to say wikis still have their uses, and we definitely still use wikis for some things. There's a link to our documentation and where our docs are kept and where Sphinx is. Thanks.
Our next talk is GW's programming consultations, and where is are you desktop?
Should be a browser window.
Including consultation.
There we go.
Pull this up more reasonable. And that's what we're going to represent.
So I'm standing between you and lunch. That will teach me to sign up faster next time. My name is Justin Littman. I'm a software developer and librarian at GW Libraries, and I want to tell you about a program that we're piloting this semester at GW. That is to offer programming and software development consultation services to anyone at GW. The idea is pretty simple. Just as people come to the library to get reference services and to meet with a reference librarian, they can come to the library and get software development assistance and meet with a software developer. The goal is to support academic or scholarly inquiry at our university, which requires coding. And like I said, it's open to anyone in the GW community, faculty, students, researchers. It's staffed by software developers and librarians, two others of which are in the room, Laura Rubel and Dan Kirchner. But we draw support from people throughout the library. Right now for the pilot, it's limited to 2 hours of consultation per week, which is scheduled in 30-minute blocks. The appointments are made via our research calendar, which is how people book their appointments with the reference librarians as well. As you can tell from this nice slide, we've gotten assistance from the library's communication staff to help us with the publicity. So what's in scope? It's fairly broad. Pretty much anything that has to do with coding, software development, scripting, or programming. You can sort of read the full list here, but the basic idea is to support a wide array of cases where people need help with their coding. So that may be the person who doesn't know what tool to select, doesn't know how to learn how to use that tool. It could be the person who has gone through Code Academy or similar and gone to write their first program and hit some sort of a bump. We're trying to help reduce those sorts of barriers. So what's out of scope? CS assignments. We're not here to help with CS assignments. We're not here to fill the function or replace TAs or professors. We're not here to help with tutoring. We've gotten a bit of each of those, people showing up with those sorts of requests, and we've had to turn them away and redirect them to the appropriate resources for that. Well, why are we doing this? Well, obviously, we want to support scholarship at GW that requires coding. We want to lower the barriers to people doing that sort of research. But the real reason we're doing this is to force us to get out of our cubes and talk to real people. And it's been fairly successful at that so far. So this has only been in place for a couple months, but we've already learned a couple things. First of all, there is a demand for this service. So here's 3 examples from consultations I had in the last week. We had a research assistant who wanted to scrape PDFs of UN security resolutions. Turns out that's really hard, but that's a separate talk. We had a student who wanted to develop a portfolio website. So we walked through all the different ways you can create a website, and we ended up settling on GitHub Pages and spent a couple minutes walking through how to create a site with GitHub Pages. That same student was also preparing for tech interviews. So we spent a couple minutes on how do you prepare for a tech interview and what sort of advice could be passed on about that from our experience. So the other things we learned, as I mentioned, is that students do need a lot of help with their CS assignments. Some need is not being met there, but that's not what we're trying to solve. We've learned something that any reference librarian will tell you, which is meeting in person is way more productive than going back and forth over email, which you can resolve in a minute or two of conversation, often takes numerous emails. And then we found this has raised our team's visibility, and so we're getting a lot more requests for assistance that are outside the scope of this, the sort of things we would normally do, helping professors write programs or gather data. But the publicity for this is making people on the campus much more aware of what our team does. So that's a definite positive benefit. And we are definitely finding that it does take more time than the 30-minute consultations. It's usually helpful to do some prep work ahead, and then some of the consultations have involved work that is extended outside of the 30-minute consultation. So if you're interested in learning more about our program, you can go to this website where if any of you have a similar program or are considering a similar program, we'd be really like to talk with you about your experiences. So thank you very much.
Final lightning talk of the morning is the RMAP project. Are you desktop? Okay. Shrink. Go away. Escape. That's it. Here we go.
I don't think it was saved. It was kind of open.
So it wasn't saved to the desktop?
Yeah, it was a download that they opened. It might be behind some of these windows. I guess somebody built it.
No, I don't see it.
It'd be in downloads.
All right. Ah, there we go.
That would be it.
Sorry.
Hello. So I'm Karen Hansen. I work for Portico, and I want to tell you about the RMAP project, which is a Sloan-funded project, which is a collaboration between the Johns Hopkins Data Conservancy, Portico, and IEEE. So the underlying idea is that the concept of a scholarly work has completely changed in recent years. So where it used to be all about the articles and other articles connected to that, a lot of the time it now looks something like this, which is you have multiple components that are in different repositories. So you might have a data set that supported the article, but that might have been derived from something, and then some savvy programmer has written some code to extract and analyze that, and that's been posted over at GitHub. So you end up with this big map of resources with all different kinds of identifiers, all different relationships between them. Some of them might not even have identifiers, and some maps might not even have articles in them. So the question is, how can you capture these new scholarly works? So that's where RMAP comes in. The goal is to capture these graphs as linked data and store and preserve them. And we're calling these maps RMAP DISCOs, which stands for Distributed Scholarly Compound Object. So broad use cases would be related to attribution, reproducibility, impact, and discovery. And I'm not going to go into each of those, but we have detailed use cases on our wiki. If you just Google RMAP project, you can find a lot of the stuff for that. So I want to acknowledge that typically you don't get this map all in one shot at the moment. A lot of the data sources have pieces of this map. And because we're primarily focused on harvesting at the moment, we're working to get these little pieces and start to connect them together. So for example, a DISCO from DataSite might look something like this, where you have references to versions of the code. You have the creators of the code, an article that it was related to, and then other citations to random websites that might be there. So I want to show you what the discos look like visually. So taking you on a quick tour, each disco gets assigned a URI so it can be retrieved. And then there's you can assert a creator and a description of that disco. And if you can imagine scrolling down, this is a web page. So you list your aggregated resources. These are the things you want to be considered as a compound object. In this case, because we're harvesting, we just have one thing because we're describing one thing. But in other cases, if a researcher wanted to create something that was a compound object, they would have multiple aggregated resources. And then you can assert whatever you want as additional statements as long as it forms a nice connected graph. So back up the top, discos can have status. So if it's active, it's assumed to be still accurate. You can make it inactive or update it. Each time you do something to the repository, it gets a related event, which just captures provenance. Anybody can create an account and create these things, so it just associates it with an account. You can version your discos, so if the links have changed or the landscape has changed for your work, then you can update it, and people can track that over time. So the other view we have is the resource view. So if you want to look at what does our map know about the single resource based on all of these discos, then visually it looked like this. You look up a DOI, for example, and you can see all of the relationships connected to that DOI. And on the right, you can see what discos mention that DOI, and you can look at those individually. So I've shown you the pretty view, but most of the work has gone into a REST API, which is responsive. It supports different flavors of RDF, and it's basically towards getting and posting discos. You can look at the resource views. You can look at all the discos created by a specific agent. And then there's some filters. So future plans, we plan to make this open source. We're looking at doing some inferencing to kind of make sure things references cross-map and clean up the data. We're looking at a point-and-click disco creation tool. And also interested in doing some memento links. So in other words, all of those broken links in articles, maybe there's something we can do with that where we provide memento links associated with that. And we're also about to start working with some pilot collaborators. So as I said, if you Google this, you'll find a lot of our websites. We have some technical documents, that we have a Twitter, and you can talk to me. I'll be here a week. So thank you.
All right, thank you to all the Lightning Talk presenters. So just two quick announcements before we can get to lunch. If you are giving a talk after the break, make sure to bring up your slides up to the podium before you go to lunch so that we can get those loaded and ready to go. And secondly, you can still sign up you can still add ideas for breakout sessions out by the registration desk, and that will be up till the end of lunch. So with that, we're breaking for lunch.